If you lock a human being inside a 7 by 14-foot steel box for 23 hours a day, the silence eventually becomes so unbearable that physical pain is a relief. Inmates in isolation have been known to bite off their own fingers or amputate body parts just to feel something other than the crushing void. You might expect a total psychological breakdown like this to be treated as a medical emergency. Instead, prison administrations routinely classify this severe self-mutilation as a security risk. The administrative treatment for breaking down in isolation is simply more isolation. What we are looking at is a legally constructed black hole. The state relies on a very specific set of mechanisms and judicial loopholes to legally permit the gradual erasure of human minds, while completely shielding wardens and guards from liability. Firmly, solitary confinement operates exactly as intended, a sanctioned, standard procedure designed to maximize control while insulating the state from accountability. Walk down the brightly lit hallway of a segregated housing unit. Behind one of these doors is someone who has been inside for 5 years. After that long, the cognitive decline is severe: hallucinations, memory loss, and an inability to process reality. This gauge represents a sentence, and that shifting boundary is the constitutional wall. Under the 14th Amendment, an inmate must prove atypical hardship. Without a Supreme Court baseline, this boundary splinters. Prisons arbitrarily decide if a year in isolation is atypical or standard. By refusing to legally define the limits of human endurance, the courts have created a vacuum. Inside that void, indefinite psychological torture becomes completely permissible. To fight this, lawyers often pivot to the Eighth Amendment's ban on cruel and unusual punishment, backing their claims with a massive vault of historical medical data. In the 1950s, psychologist Harry Harlow placed rhesus monkeys in a solitary chamber he literally called the pit of despair. He discovered a direct, undeniable correlation between the amount of time the animals spent in isolation and the onset of severe self-mutilation. To see how this translates to humans, Dr. Donald Hebb at McGill University conducted an experiment in 1951 where he paid healthy graduate students to undergo sensory deprivation. Hebb used cardboard tubes and goggles to block continuous sensory input to the human brain. The results were terrifying. Within just a few days, the subjects experienced vivid hallucinations, intense paranoia, and severe mental impairment. A human brain trapped in a 7 by 14-foot box for years undergoes a physical metamorphosis. Starved of input, the organ prunes its own neural connections, resulting in fewer synapses and a diminished capacity to process reality. This state has possessed undeniable, peer-reviewed scientific proof of this cognitive destruction for over 70 years. Yet, knowing exactly what isolation does to a mammalian brain, the prison system actively expanded the practice anyway. When inmates sue over this brain damage, prison wardens deploy their ultimate legal defense, the doctrine of qualified immunity. This rule protects government officials from civil liability, completely shielding them from lawsuits, unless their conduct violates a statutory or constitutional right that is clearly established in law. This map of U.S. circuit courts shows why a clearly established limit is impossible. Jurisdictions are deeply divided. The First, Eighth, and 10th Circuits routinely rule that keeping someone isolated for decades and depriving them of sunlight for 23 years is perfectly constitutional. The law itself acts as the shield. By leaning on these geographic contradictions, the system weaponizes judicial confusion to protect prison officials from the scientific reality of their actions. Inside the courtroom, the legal battle hinges on a single phrase: deliberate indifference. To win an Eighth Amendment claim, an inmate must prove the state knowingly disregarded their medical needs. In practice, mental health care in the whole is severely inadequate. It often consists of brief, 2-minute drive-by check-ins through a steel door, frequently conducted by untrained security staff dispensing pills. Yet legally, this is routinely classified as adequate treatment. And here is the typical judicial outcome. Because the Supreme Court has never drawn a hard, numerical line on how long isolation can last, the psychological damage is not considered a clearly established violation. The warden is granted qualified immunity, and the lawsuit dies. The medical reality of a dying mind is entirely irrelevant to a court system that prioritizes institutional deference over human survival. After the gavel falls, the physical reality of the prison remains unchanged. The inmate goes right back to the same cell. Absolute hopelessness sets in as the heavy steel doors slam shut, sealing them inside. We have known what this practice does to a person for a very long time. When Charles Dickens toured the American penitentiary system in the 1800s, he was horrified by what he saw in the isolation wards. He famously described the inmates there as men who are literally buried alive, to be done out in the slow rounds of years. So, how long can the state legally bury someone alive? The answer is terrifyingly simple. Until the highest court decides to draw a definitive line in the dirt, the psychological execution can last forever.